My name is Evelyn, and I'm 58 years old. For 35 years, I dedicated my life to my husband Greg and our son Thomas. I thought I'd built an unshakable foundation of love and sacrifice. But last spring, Thomas told me I needed to vacate the guest house where I'd been living to make room for his in-laws. That same afternoon, Greg handed me divorce papers with cold, calculating eyes. What neither of them knew was that I'd been quietly preparing my exit strategy for years. And the biggest shock of all, everything they loved, the main house, the guest house, even the land they stood on, was still legally in my name. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against your own family. This story about betrayal preparation and sweet justice might just give you the courage to make your own escape plan. I met Greg during my final year of college when I was 22 and full of dreams about changing the world through education. He was 26, ambitious, and already showing promise in real estate development. We fell in love quickly, the kind of whirlwind romance that makes you believe in destiny. Greg proposed after just 9 months, and we married in a small ceremony with our closest friends and family present. I remember my father warning me about rushing, but I was sure Greg was the one. The early years were happy, if busy. I secured a position teaching 4th grade at a local elementary school, while Greg worked long hours establishing his real estate business. We lived in a modest starter home, saving diligently for our future. When I became pregnant with Thomas 3 years into our marriage, we were overjoyed. Greg insisted I should stay home with the baby, at least for the first few years. "Evelyn, you can go back to teaching any time," he said. "These years with our son are irreplaceable, and with how well the business is doing, we can afford it." It made sense at the time. Greg's company, Turner Development, was indeed taking off. He'd found a niche renovating historic buildings into luxury apartments, and the profits were substantial. What was supposed to be a temporary break from teaching stretched into 5 years, then 10 as Greg's work demands increased. And my role became managing our home and raising Thomas. Thomas was a sweet, sensitive child who needed consistent attention. Greg, while loving, was largely absent, missing baseball games, school performances, and family dinners due to important meetings that couldn't be rescheduled. I became both mother and father in many ways, handling everything from homework to emotional support, while Greg provided financially. "You're so lucky, Evelyn," my friends would say. "Greg makes enough that you don't have to work, and you have this beautiful home." From the outside, I suppose it did look ideal. When Thomas was 7, we moved into what Greg called our forever home, a sprawling 5-bedroom house on 3 acres just outside the city. Greg spared no expense hiring renowned architects and interior designers to create a showcase property. The main house featured soaring ceilings, a gourmet kitchen where I loved to cook, and a library filled with books I rarely had time to read. On the property sat a charming guest house about 800 square feet with its own small garden. Greg had it built for visiting family or business associates, though it stood empty most of the time. Little did I know it would eventually become my residence. As Thomas entered his teenage years, Greg's business expanded rapidly. He opened offices in 3 neighboring states and was rarely home for more than a few days at a time. I found myself increasingly involved in the paperwork side of the business, handling invoices, organizing tax documents, and occasionally stepping in to manage customer complaints when Greg was unavailable. I never received a salary for this work. It was just expected as part of my wifely duties. "You know I couldn't do any of this without you, Evelyn," Greg would say after a particularly hectic period. "You're the backbone of this family and the business." The compliments were nice, but they didn't fill the growing emptiness I felt as Thomas prepared for college, and my days stretched before me with little purpose beyond maintaining our beautiful but often empty home. I suggested returning to teaching, but Greg dismissed the idea. "Why would you want to deal with other people's children for a teacher's salary?" he asked incredulously. "Besides, I need you available when clients come over. or when I have to travel. So I remained the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties, attending charity events on Greg's arm, and maintaining the fiction of our ideal marriage. Thomas graduated high school and headed to the same university his father had attended, majoring in business, with the expectation that he would eventually join Greg at Turner Development. It was during Thomas's sophomore year of college that I first noticed significant changes in Greg. He became more distant, spending even more time away from home and being vague about his whereabouts. When he was home, he was constantly on his phone, stepping outside to take calls and growing irritated if I asked who had called. "Just business, Evelyn," he'd snap. "Not everything needs to be your concern." When Thomas brought Ashley home during his junior year, I was hopeful that having a potential daughter-in-law might bring some joy back into our increasingly sterile home. Ashley was undeniably beautiful, tall, blonde, and always impeccably dressed in designer clothes that seemed excessive for a college student. She studied marketing and came from what she described as an affluent family in Connecticut, a fact she managed to work into almost every conversation. During their first visit, I noticed how Ashley inspected our home with an appraising eye, running her fingers along the marble countertops and asking pointed questions about the artwork and furniture. "This place has such potential," she said during dinner in a tone that suggested it wasn't living up to that potential. My mother works with an incredible interior designer who could really update some of these spaces. Greg surprisingly seemed charmed by Ashley's forwardness. "Maybe we should get her number," he said with a wink at Thomas. "Evelyn's taste hasn't changed since the 90s. It was a small comment, but it stung. I had always been proud of the warm, inviting home I'd created for our family, and Greg had never complained before. That weekend set the tone for what was to come, a gradual erosion of my place in my own family. Thomas and Ashley married immediately after college graduation in an extravagant ceremony that Ashley's parents largely funded. Greg contributed significantly as well, without consulting me about the budget. When Thomas announced they would be moving into our main house while they established themselves professionally, I was taken aback but tried to be supportive. "We have more than enough space," Greg insisted when I expressed concern privately. "They'll have the east wing and we'll hardly even notice them." That might have been true if Ashley hadn't immediately set about refreshing the entire house, starting with the kitchen I had lovingly designed years earlier. Without asking, she replaced appliances, had cabinets repainted, and ordered new furniture that arrived without warning. "Don't you love it?" she'd ask after each change in a tone that made it clear no other answer but enthusiastic approval would be accepted. Within 6 months, Greg suggested that I move into the guest house to give the kids some space to grow. He presented it as a positive change, a private retreat for me, where I could pursue hobbies and have quiet time away from Ashley's frequent entertaining. "Besides," he added, "you're always complaining about how Ashley's changing everything. This way, you can have your own space exactly how you want it." I hadn't been complaining, merely expressing dismay at seeing the home I'd built being dismantled without my input. But by then, I'd learned that any criticism of Ashley was met with unified defense from both my husband and son. Reluctantly, I relocated to the guest house, taking only my personal belongings and a few cherished pieces of furniture. The guest house, while lovely, felt like exile. I could see the main house from my window's lights blazing late into the night as Ashley hosted parties for her growing social circle. Thomas, now working at Turner Development under Greg's mentorship, began to visit me less and less. When I'd walk over to the main house, I increasingly felt like a visitor rather than an owner. The shift happened so gradually that I barely noticed when I stopped being invited to family meals or when my opinions ceased to matter in household decisions. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. I could see the disaster unfolding, but felt powerless to stop it. The first significant crack in my marriage appeared during our 30th anniversary celebration. Greg had promised a special trip to Italy, something we'd talked about for years. 2 weeks before our departure, he canceled, citing an emergency with a development project in Chicago. "I'll make it up to you," he assured me, barely looking up from his laptop. "We can go next year." I was disappointed but understanding. After all, his business had always come first. But when I later discovered through a mutual friend that Greg had actually been in Miami that week with his business partner Jessica, the hurt and suspicion took root. When confronted, Greg dismissed my concerns with practiced ease. "Jessica and I were meeting potential investors. Would you rather I turn down millions in funding to take a vacation?" His explanation was plausible, but something in his defensive tone made me uneasy. After that, I began noticing patterns: late-night phone calls he took outside unexplained weekend business trips, and a growing emotional distance. Our conversations became superficial, focused on household logistics rather than any meaningful connection. Around this time, our financial discussions grew increasingly tense. Despite Turner Development's apparent success, Greg began expressing concerns about retirement planning and cash flow. "We need to be more careful with spending," he declared one evening. "The market's unstable." This seemed odd, given that just a month earlier, he'd purchased a new luxury sports car without discussion. When I pointed out the contradiction, he became irritated. "The car is an investment, Evelyn. You wouldn't understand business strategy." These dismissals of my intelligence became more frequent, a stark contrast to earlier years when Greg had valued my input on business matters. Simultaneously, our son Thomas began echoing his father's attitudes toward me. "Mom, you really don't need to check in on us so often," he complained after I'd dropped by with homemade soup when Ashley had a cold. "We're adults. We can manage our own home." It was their home now, apparently, despite the fact that Greg and I still owned it. Ashley would often make small comments reinforcing this perception. "When we renovate the upstairs bathroom," or, "In our house, we prefer to keep the thermostat at 72. The most telling incident came when I overheard Greg speaking with his longtime attorney, Michael Winters, in Greg's home office. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the mention of my name caught my attention as I passed by the slightly open door. "Evelyn doesn't need to know about the lakeside property transfer," Greg was saying. "It's better to keep these assets separate given the current situation." "Greg, I should remind you that, as your wife, she's entitled to," Michael began. "I know what the law says," Greg interrupted sharply. "That's why I'm talking to you about options." I quietly retreated, my heart pounding. That night, I couldn't sleep, replaying the conversation and wondering what situation Greg was referring to and what property he was hiding from me. The next morning, I made my first crucial decision: I would seek independent legal advice. Finding Diana Lewis was a stroke of luck. A friend from my brief teaching career had recently divorced and recommended Diana as a compassionate but fierce attorney who specialized in protecting women in high-asset divorces. I made an appointment, explaining my concerns without definitively stating I wanted a divorce. "I just need to understand where I stand," I told her. Diana's office was warm and unpretentious, nothing like the intimidating glass and chrome environment of Greg's attorneys. She listened attentively as I described my 35-year marriage, my contributions to Greg's business, and my growing concerns. "Evelyn," she said gently when I finished, "what you're describing, the secrecy, the financial maneuvering, the emotional withdrawal, these are often precursors to what we call divorce planning. It's when one spouse prepares to leave the marriage while positioning assets in their favor." Her words hit me like a physical blow. While I had suspected something was wrong, having a professional confirm my fears made them real in a way I wasn't prepared for. "Here's what we're going to do," Diana continued, her voice now businesslike. "First, we need a complete picture of your financial situation. Every account, property, investment, and retirement fund. Next, we'll secure copies of important documents, tax returns, property deeds, business valuations." Following Diana's advice, I began my own careful investigation. When Greg was traveling, I went through our home office, taking photos of documents and making copies of anything that seemed important. What I discovered was both reassuring and shocking. The property deed to our home and land was solely in my name. Early in our marriage, when Greg was starting his business and taking financial risks, he had put the property in my name to protect it from potential business creditors. He had apparently never changed this arrangement. Several other properties, including a vacation home in the mountains, were jointly owned. I also discovered that Greg had indeed been hiding assets, a lakefront property purchased 2 years earlier through a limited liability company. The LLC's mailing address was Jessica's home. I photographed everything I could find related to this property and brought it to Diana. "This is very helpful," she said, examining the documents. "Greg has been careless, probably because he assumes you won't check. This kind of asset hiding won't look good to a judge." Armed with this knowledge, I began preparing for a future I had never imagined, one where I might be on my own after 35 years of marriage. I opened a separate bank account at a different bank than the one Greg and I used, depositing small amounts from our joint household account that wouldn't be noticed. I began researching teaching certification renewal requirements, discovering that I would need significant coursework to reinstate my lapsed credentials. Secretly, I enrolled in online classes, studying late at night in the guest house, while the main house blazed with lights from another of Ashley's dinner parties. The most significant step came when Diana advised me to secure my own financial future. "Greg's business may be the biggest asset in your marriage," she explained. "You'll need a forensic accountant to determine its true value if you decide to divorce." The accountant Diana recommended, Robert Chen, did a preliminary analysis based on the tax documents I provided. "Based on these figures, Turner Development is worth between $15 and $20 million, he informed me during a confidential meeting. "As the spouse who supported the business growth, you would likely be entitled to approximately half that value." The number was staggering. I had known Greg was successful, but I had no idea the business had grown so valuable. Robert also pointed out that my unpaid work for the company strengthened my claim to a significant portion of its value. "Document everything you've done for the business over the years," he advised. "Every invoice you processed, every client you managed, every business dinner you hosted. It all counts as contribution." While I was quietly preparing, I also found emotional support through an unexpected source. During one of my online classes, I connected with Margaret, a fellow student in her 60s who had recently divorced after 40 years of marriage. "My husband replaced me with his 28-year-old assistant," she shared during a study session that had evolved into a heart-to-heart conversation. "I thought my life was over. Turns out, it was just beginning." Margaret introduced me to a support group for women going through midlife transitions. These weekly online meetings became my lifeline, a place where I could speak openly about my fears and receive guidance from women who had survived similar situations. "The most important thing is to be prepared before you make any moves," advised Barbara, a 70-year-old group member who had rebuilt her life after divorce at 60. "Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to finances." Taking this advice to heart, I continued my careful documentation while maintaining the appearance of the dutiful wife and mother. I never confronted Greg about what I had discovered, never let on that I suspected his infidelity or financial maneuvering. I simply watched, waited, and prepared. During this time, I also took steps to secure my future housing. With Diana's guidance, I used a portion of a small inheritance from my mother to purchase a modest townhouse in a neighboring city about 30 minutes from our current home. The property was placed in a trust Diana helped establish, ensuring it wouldn't appear in any searches connected to my name. "Think of it as an insurance policy," Diana said. "A place that's yours alone that no one can take from you." I furnished this secret home gradually, finding joy in selecting each piece myself without considering Greg's preferences or Ashley's judgmental gaze. It became my sanctuary, a physical manifestation of the independent life I was beginning to envision for myself. A life that, despite my fear of the unknown, was starting to feel like a possibility rather than an impossibility. As the months passed, my relationship with Ashley deteriorated from strained politeness to barely concealed hostility. What had begun as occasional critical comments about my clothing or cooking evolved into regular disparagement of everything from my outdated hairstyle to my boring life. "Don't you ever want to do something interesting, Evelyn?" she asked during a rare family dinner. "All you do is putter around that guest house and read. It's like you're already in a retirement home." Thomas, rather than defending me, often joined in with his own criticisms. "Mom's always been content with a simple life." He said the word simple, carrying a distinctly negative connotation. Greg would remain silent during these exchanges, his lack of defense speaking volumes. The united front they presented made me feel like an outsider in the family I had built. Ashley came from significant wealth, a fact she emphasized repeatedly. Her father owned a chain of high-end fitness centers across the Northeast, and her mother was a former model turned interior designer. Ashley had grown up with household staff country club memberships and annual European vacations. Our upper-middle-class lifestyle, despite the spacious home and comfortable amenities, seemed inadequate to her. "My parents' pool house is bigger than this guest house," she remarked once while visiting me. "I can't imagine living in such a confined space." The guest house, with its 800 square feet one-bedroom and small but functional kitchen, was perfectly adequate for my needs. Ashley's comment wasn't about the space itself, but about establishing hierarchy, reminding me that in her view, I was less than. As Ashley settled into her role as mistress of the main house, she began inviting her family for extended stays. Her parents, Bradford and Catherine Lawrence, were polite but distant with me. Her younger sister, Madison, still in college, treated the house like her personal resort, leaving wet towels on furniture and emptying the refrigerator without consideration. During these visits, I was rarely included in family activities. I would watch from my window as they gathered on the back patio for barbecues or departed for dinner at expensive restaurants. Thomas occasionally extended half-hearted invitations, but Ashley's expression made it clear these were merely obligatory gestures. "We're going to Vincenzo's for dinner, Mom," he might say. "You're welcome to join, but we've only got the reservation for 4, so you'd need to call and see if they can add a seat." The implied message was clear: I was an afterthought, not a priority. Most times, I declined these invitations, unwilling to subject myself to an evening of subtle exclusion and condescension. The situation reached a breaking point during Thomas's 30th birthday party. Ashley had organized an elaborate gathering at the main house, inviting numerous friends and colleagues, but forgetting to send me a formal invitation. I had only learned about the event when the caterers mistakenly came to the guest house looking for access to the main kitchen. When I arrived at the party dressed in a new outfit I'd purchased specifically for the occasion, Ashley greeted me with obvious surprise. "Oh, Evelyn, I didn't realize you'd be joining us." Her tone suggested I was an unexpected and not particularly welcome addition. Throughout the evening, I was repeatedly overlooked seated at a back table far from Thomas, not included in the group photographs, and noticeably absent from Ashley's toast to "the family we've created together." The final insult came when I overheard Ashley speaking to her mother in what she thought was a private corner. "I know, Mom. It's awkward having her hovering around all the time. Greg says she's too emotionally attached to the house to leave, but we're working on it. Thomas thinks we could convince her to move into a senior community after the baby." Baby. This was the first I'd heard of a grandchild. My own son hadn't thought to share this momentous news with me yet. Ashley was casually discussing it with her mother, as if it were common knowledge. I managed to maintain my composure through the remainder of the party, but once back in the guest house, I allowed myself to cry for the first time in years. The family I had devoted my life to had not only excluded me from their present, but was actively planning to remove me from their future. The next morning, I discovered another troubling development. Returning unexpectedly from an errand, I found Ashley and Thomas in the guest house rifling through my desk drawers. "What are you doing?" I demanded, startling them both. Thomas recovered quickly. "Sorry, Mom. We were looking for those old family photo albums. Ashley wants to use some pictures for a project." The explanation might have been plausible if the photo albums weren't clearly visible on the bookshelf untouched. What they had been examining was my folder of teaching certification documents. After they left with hasty excuses, I checked my other hiding places and found subtle signs of disturbance. My personal journal slightly repositioned the box containing my mother's jewelry, not quite closed properly. They had conducted a thorough search of my private space, violating the one area I had thought was still my own. That evening, I tried to discuss the incident with Greg, hoping he might still have some respect for my privacy and basic dignity. "They were probably just curious," he dismissed, not looking up from his phone. "You shouldn't leave personal things lying around if you don't want people to see them." "In my own home?" I asked incredulously. "It's technically our guest house, Evelyn," he corrected, "and they're family, not intruders." The conversation left me shaken. If Greg wouldn't even acknowledge this clear violation, what else would he justify? How far would they go to push me out? The answer came a week later when Thomas approached me with what he presented as a thoughtful suggestion. "Mom, Ashley and I have been looking into some really nice retirement communities. There's one called Sunset Meadows that has amazing amenities, pool, social activities, even a small theater for movie nights." "Thomas, I'm 57, I responded carefully. "I'm not ready for a retirement community." "It's not about age, Mom," he insisted. "It's about lifestyle. You're alone in this guest house most of the time. At Sunset Meadows, you'd have friends your own age activities to keep you busy." The subtext was unmistakable. They wanted me out completely off the property. The guest house wasn't enough distance. They wanted me in another facility entirely neatly removed from their daily lives. "I'm happy where I am," I stated firmly. "But thank you for your concern." Thomas's expression hardened a look so similar to Greg's disapproving frown that it momentarily took my breath away. "Fine. Just trying to help," he said curtly before walking away. That night, I called Diana Lewis and updated her on the situation. "They're escalating," she observed. "These aren't just casual suggestions anymore. They're actively trying to remove you from the property. Has Greg said anything about divorce recently?" "Not directly," I admitted, "but he's been having more private phone calls, staying later at the office. Something's coming." "Then we need to accelerate our preparations," Diana advised. "Based on everything you've told me, I think we're looking at weeks, not months, before something breaks." How right she was. The breaking point was already approaching faster than either of us anticipated, and would arrive in a form I never expected, a devastating 1-2 punch that would test every ounce of the strength and preparation I had built over the past 3 years. I woke on my 58th birthday, with no expectations of celebration. In recent years, Greg had reduced my birthday acknowledgement to a generic card and perhaps a gift certificate, while Thomas typically sent a text message or made a brief phone call. I planned to treat myself to lunch at my favorite cafe and perhaps visit a nearby bookstore, small pleasures that had become increasingly important in my isolated life. To my surprise, Thomas called early that morning with what seemed like a genuine invitation. "Mom, we'd love for you to come over for breakfast. Ashley's made her special blueberry pancakes, and we have something we want to talk to you about." The warmth in his voice sparked a flicker of hope. Perhaps my birthday had reminded him of our once close relationship, or maybe Ashley was making an effort at reconciliation. Either way, I accepted gratefully and spent extra time on my appearance, selecting a flattering blue dress and the pearl earrings Greg had given me on our 25th anniversary. When I arrived at the main house, the atmosphere seemed unusually tense despite the festive breakfast table set with fresh flowers and quality china. Ashley greeted me with a tight smile, and Thomas seemed nervous, repeatedly checking his watch. Greg was conspicuously absent, having left early for a meeting, according to Thomas. "Before we eat, we're waiting for my parents to arrive," Ashley announced. "They're running a few minutes late." This was unexpected. I had no particular relationship with the Lawrences beyond polite exchanges at family gatherings. Their inclusion in what I had assumed would be a small birthday breakfast struck me as odd. Bradford and Catherine Lawrence arrived 20 minutes later, entering the house with the comfortable familiarity of frequent visitors. Behind them trailed Madison Ashley's younger sister, tapping away at her phone and barely acknowledging my presence. "Happy birthday, Evelyn," Catherine offered perfunctorily before turning her attention to Ashley, complimenting the table setting and inquiring about the coffee. We settled around the dining table, an awkward gathering that felt more like a business meeting than a celebration. No one mentioned my birthday again. Instead, Ashley served pancakes while Thomas fidgeted with his napkin, exchanging meaningful glances with his wife. Finally, after an uncomfortable silence broken only by the clinking of silverware, Thomas cleared his throat. "Mom, we asked you here because we have some news and a proposition to discuss." I nodded encouragingly, fork poised over my barely touched pancakes. "First, we're excited to share that Ashley is pregnant," Thomas announced, reaching for his wife's hand. "You're going to be a grandmother." Despite the complicated feelings about my relationship with them, genuine joy surged through me. A grandchild, something I had longed for, but had begun to think might never happen. "That's wonderful news," I said warmly. "Congratulations to both of you. When are you due, Ashley?" "October," she replied, her hand protectively covering her still flat stomach. "Which brings us to the second thing we need to discuss." Thomas took over again, his expression now serious. "With the baby coming, we've been thinking about family logistics. The East Wing has 3 bedrooms, but we're planning to use one as a nursery and the other as a home office since we'll both be working from home more." I nodded, uncertain where this was heading, but beginning to feel uneasy. "Ashley's parents have offered to help with childcare," Thomas continued. "They want to be actively involved in their first grandchild's life, which we think is fantastic." "Of course," I agreed, though a pang of jealousy struck me at the implication that the Lawrences would have a privileged role with my grandchild. "The thing is, Mom," Thomas said, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality, "for this to work smoothly, Brad and Catherine need to be on site. We've all discussed it, and the most sensible solution is for them to use the guest house." The words hung in the air for a moment before their full meaning registered. They weren't just announcing a pregnancy or discussing childcare arrangements. They were telling me I needed to move out of my home. "You want me to leave the guest house?" I asked, needing confirmation of what seemed unthinkable. "We thought you might appreciate the opportunity to find a place that better suits your needs," Ashley interjected smoothly. "The guest house is really quite small, and with your interest in returning to teaching, perhaps something closer to potential schools would make sense." "I've lived here for 8 years," I said quietly. "Where exactly am I supposed to go on such short notice?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "We've been researching some options. There are several nice apartment complexes nearby, or as I mentioned before, retirement communities that—" "I am not moving to a retirement community," I interrupted, my voice firmer than I'd intended. "I'm only 58, Thomas." Bradford Lawrence, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. "Evelyn, we understand this is unexpected, but the guest house would allow us to be present for our grandchild while maintaining some independence. We'd be willing to help with your relocation costs, of course." His tone was reasonable, even generous, yet the underlying message was clear. My presence was an inconvenience to be resolved through financial compensation. "When would you need me to leave?" I asked, setting down my fork as my appetite vanished completely. "Ideally within the next 2 weeks," Ashley replied without hesitation. "My parents need time to renovate before the baby comes." 2 weeks. They expected me to vacate my home of 8 years, find new housing, and relocate my entire life in 14 days. The casual cruelty of it struck me like a physical blow. "I see," I managed to say, rising from the table. "If you'll excuse me, I need some time to process this." No one tried to stop me as I gathered my purse and left without finishing breakfast. No one mentioned that it was my birthday, or offered any acknowledgement of how devastating their proposition might be. In their minds, it seemed the matter was already settled. I walked slowly back to the guest house, my thoughts churning. After all my preparation, all my suspicion that something was coming, the actual event had still blindsided me. The timing on my birthday, no less, felt particularly cruel. I had barely entered the guest house when I saw Greg's car pull into the driveway. He parked and walked not toward the main house, but directly to the guest house. His expression was grim, his posture stiff with resolve. "We need to talk, Evelyn," he said as soon as I opened the door. I stepped aside silently, allowing him to enter. He remained standing, declining to sit, when I gestured toward the living area. "I assume Thomas has told you about the baby and their plans for the guest house," he began. "Yes, just now. Quite a birthday surprise." Greg had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable at the mention of my birthday, but pressed on. "It makes sense for Ashley's parents to be here. They can provide substantial help with the baby, and their financial contribution will be significant." "And where do I fit into these plans, Greg?" I asked quietly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar from our years together that it sent an unexpected pang of sadness through me. "That's actually why I came to talk to you. There's no easy way to say this, Evelyn, but I think it's time we face reality. Our marriage hasn't been working for years. We're essentially living separate lives already." Though I had anticipated this moment, hearing the words spoken aloud still felt like a blow. "You want a divorce?" I stated flatly. "I think it's for the best," he confirmed, reaching into his jacket to remove an envelope. "I've had papers drawn up. My attorney has outlined a settlement that I believe is fair." He extended the envelope, which I made no move to accept. "You've been planning this," I observed. "For how long, Greg?" "That's not important," he deflected. "What matters is moving forward in a way that works for everyone. The settlement offers you a fair cash payment and ongoing support, enough for you to find a comfortable place to live and maintain your lifestyle." I almost laughed at the irony. Greg truly believed he was being generous, that he held all the cards in this situation. "And the timing, delivering divorce papers the same day, your son tells me I need to vacate my home. That's just coincidence." Greg had the decency to look slightly ashamed. "The situations are related, yes. With the baby coming and changes happening, it seemed like the right time to make a clean break on all fronts." "A clean break," I repeated, "after 35 years of marriage." "Evelyn, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be," he said, his tone hardening. "My attorney has ensured the settlement is fair. You'll be well taken care of." I finally took the envelope, setting it unopened on the coffee table. "I'll need to review this with my own attorney," I said calmly. Greg's eyebrows shot up. "You have an attorney since when?" "That's not important," I echoed his earlier dismissal. "What matters is moving forward in a way that works for everyone." My use of his own words clearly unsettled him. For perhaps the first time in years, Greg really looked at me not as his reliable wife or a problem to solve, but as an individual with agency and possibly secrets of her own. "This doesn't need to get complicated," he said, his confident tone now tinged with uncertainty. "I've been very generous in the settlement offer." "I'm sure you believe that," I replied. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd like some time alone. It's been quite a birthday so far." Greg hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "Call Michael when you're ready to discuss the terms. The sooner we resolve this, the better for everyone." After he left, I sat motionless for several minutes, allowing the full reality of the day's events to wash over me. In the span of 2 hours, I had been told I was losing my home, my marriage, and potentially my relationship with my future grandchild. The 3 people I had devoted my life to, Greg, Thomas, and by extension Ashley, had collaborated to remove me from their lives in one coordinated sweep. The perfect storm they had created was meant to leave me reeling, vulnerable, and acquiescent to whatever terms they dictated. They expected me to be blindsided, overwhelmed, and ultimately powerless. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. They had severely underestimated me, and in doing so had made a catastrophic miscalculation. With steady hands, I reached for my phone and dialed Diana Lewis. It was time to implement the contingency plan we had so carefully developed. "Diana," I said when she answered, "it's happening. Both of them on the same day. They want me out of the guest house in 2 weeks, and Greg just served me with divorce papers." "Are you all right, Evelyn?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "Actually, I am." I realized, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I've been preparing for this for years. Now it's time to show them exactly what I'm capable of." The next morning, I awoke with a clarity and resolve that surprised me. Despite the emotional devastation of the previous day, I felt strangely empowered. The worst had happened, yet I was still standing. The meticulously constructed facade had finally crumbled, allowing me to step out from behind it. I spent the early hours organizing documents and making necessary calls according to the contingency plan Diana and I had developed. By 10 o'clock, I was dressed in one of my rarely worn business suits, my hair neatly styled, ready for the confrontation I knew was coming. Greg called at 10:15, his voice terse. "Evelyn, have you reviewed the settlement offer? Michael is expecting your call." "I have reviewed it with my attorney," I replied calmly. "We find it inadequate and not reflective of my contributions to our marriage or your business." A brief silence followed. "Your attorney. Since when do you have an attorney?" "Since I began suspecting you were planning to divorce me, Greg. Approximately 3 years ago." Another pause, longer this time. 3 years? What are you talking about?" "I think we should discuss this in person," I suggested. "Would 4 o'clock at the main house work for you? I'd like Thomas and Ashley to be present as well, since their plans for the guest house are directly relevant to our divorce proceedings." "There's no need to involve them," Greg protested quickly. "This is between us. Actually, it involves all of us. 4 o'clock, Greg. I'll see you then." I ended the call before he could argue further. Next, I called Thomas, who sounded wary when he answered. "Mom, is everything okay?" "We need to have a family meeting at 4 today," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "It's important that you and Ashley be there." "Is this about the guest house? Because we really do need—" "It's about many things, Thomas. 4 o'clock. Please make sure you're both available." I spent the rest of the day preparing with Diana, who agreed to accompany me to the meeting. We gathered all necessary documentation, reviewed key talking points, and discussed likely scenarios and counter-arguments. By the time we arrived at the main house, I felt as prepared as possible for the confrontation ahead. Greg opened the door, his expression darkening when he saw Diana beside me. "Who's this?" "Diana Lewis, my attorney." I introduced her. "I mentioned I'd had legal counsel review your settlement offer." Greg's jaw tightened as he reluctantly ushered us inside. In the living room, Thomas and Ashley sat together on the sofa, both looking uncomfortable. To my surprise, Bradford and Catherine Lawrence were also present, seated in armchairs by the fireplace. "I wasn't expecting Ashley's parents to join us," I observed, turning to Greg. "Since their relocation plans are part of this discussion, I thought it made sense for them to be here," Greg explained, a defensive edge to his voice. "That's fine," I agreed calmly, settling into a chair with Diana beside me. "This actually makes things more efficient." Greg remained standing, positioning himself like an executive at the head of a boardroom. "Evelyn, I understand you're upset about the timing of everything, but these arrangements make the most practical sense for everyone. The settlement I've offered is more than fair." "Let me stop you there, Greg," I interrupted, opening the folder I had brought. "Before we discuss your settlement offer, there are some facts everyone should be aware of." I withdrew a document and passed copies to Greg Thomas and Bradford Lawrence. "This is the deed to the main house and surrounding property, including the guest house. As you can see, it is solely in my name." Greg frowned, snatching up the paper. "That can't be right. We purchased this property jointly." "Actually, no," I corrected. When you were expanding the business and concerned about potential liability issues, you transferred the property entirely into my name. You said it was to protect our home from any business creditors or lawsuits. That was 20 years ago, and the arrangement was never changed. Thomas looked up from the document, confusion evident on his face. Dad, is this true? Greg's complexion had reddened. It was a temporary protection measure. Obviously, the intent was always that it was our joint property. Intent doesn't change legal ownership, Diana interjected smoothly. The property, both main house and guest house, legally belongs to Evelyn alone. Ashley gasped, turning to Thomas with wide eyes. What does this mean? It means, I continued, that decisions about who lives in the guest house are legally mine to make, not yours. And it means that in the divorce, the house remains my property, not a joint asset to be divided. Greg's confident demeanor had crumbled into barely contained anger. This is absurd. One technical detail doesn't change 35 years of marriage. Half of everything we have is rightfully mine. Including Turner Development, I asked mildly, removing another document from my folder. This is an analysis by a forensic accountant detailing my contributions to the company over the past 3 decades. Administrative work, client relations, document preparation, all unpaid labor that helped build the business to its current value. I handed the report to Greg, whose hands were actually shaking as he took it. The estimated value of my contributions, plus my entitlement as your spouse during the company's growth period, amounts to approximately 45% of the company's worth. Based on current valuation, that's roughly $8 million. The room had fallen completely silent. Thomas stared at me as if he'd never seen me before. Ashley had gone pale, one hand protectively covering her stomach. The Lawrences exchanged worried glances. You've been planning this, Greg finally said, his voice low and dangerous. All this time while I trusted you. While you trusted me, I repeated incredulously. While you were meeting with attorneys to plan your exit strategy. While you were hiding assets like the lakeside property purchased through an LLC registered to Jessica's address. Greg blanched at the mention of the hidden property. How did you? I've known for 3 years, Greg. I've known about the affair, the hidden assets, the divorce planning. I've been preparing too, gathering documentation, securing my position. The difference is, I didn't betray anyone in the process. I simply protected myself. Thomas stood abruptly. What are you saying, Mom? That you're going to force us all out of the house? That you're going to take Dad's company? This isn't like you. No, Thomas, I'm not going to force anyone out. Unlike the plans you and Ashley made for me. I met my son's gaze steadily. I'm simply establishing the legal reality so we can negotiate from an accurate starting point. Bradford Lawrence, who had been listening intently, leaned forward. If I may, what exactly are you proposing, Evelyn? I appreciated his pragmatic approach, so different from Greg and Thomas's emotional reactions. I'm proposing we acknowledge the legal facts and negotiate a fair resolution. I have no desire to destroy the company Greg built or to disrupt your family plans, Thomas, but I will not be discarded after 35 years of marriage and treated as if my contributions meant nothing. And the guest house? Ashley asked, her usual confidence noticeably diminished. That depends on how we proceed from here, I replied honestly. If we can reach an equitable agreement about the divorce and my ongoing relationship with my family, including my future grandchild, then I'm open to discussing transitional arrangements for the guest house. Catherine Lawrence, who had remained silent until now, spoke up unexpectedly. Bradford, perhaps we should reconsider our plans. There are lovely short-term rentals near Thomas and Ashley's home that would serve our purposes. I shot her a grateful look, surprised by this sudden ally. Bradford nodded thoughtfully. Catherine's right. We can still help with the baby without creating additional complications. He turned to me. Evelyn, I apologize if our involvement added pressure to an already difficult situation. That wasn't our intention. His sincere apology caught me off guard. I had expected united opposition, not understanding. Thank you, Bradford. I appreciate that. Greg, however, was not so easily placated. "This is ridiculous. You can't possibly expect to walk away with the house and half the company. No judge would award that." "Actually," Diana interjected, "given the circumstances, the documented contributions, the hidden assets, the evidence of infidelity, many judges would award exactly that or more. Evelyn has been extremely reasonable in her expectations." "Evidence of infidelity," Thomas repeated, looking at his father with new uncertainty. I hadn't planned to publicly expose Greg's affair, but his aggressive stance had forced my hand. "Greg has been involved with Jessica Mills for at least 2 years. I have photographs, hotel receipts, and witness statements." Greg's face contorted with fury. "You had me followed." "No, Greg, Jessica's husband had her followed. He approached me 6 months ago, assuming I already knew. He was quite surprised to discover I didn't." This revelation seemed to deflate Greg completely. He sank into a chair, the fight visibly draining from him. "What do you want, Evelyn? Just tell me what you want." It was the question I had prepared for, most carefully understanding that this moment would define not just my financial future, but my ongoing relationships with Thomas and my grandchild. "I want a fair division of assets that recognizes my contributions to our marriage and your business. I want to remain in the guest house for now with the understanding that I'll likely relocate within the year on my timeline, not yours. And I want a commitment that I'll have regular, unimpeded access to my grandchild, regardless of how this divorce proceeds." Thomas, who had been watching the exchange with growing comprehension, finally spoke. "Mom, of course, you'll be part of the baby's life. I never meant to suggest otherwise." "Your actions suggested otherwise quite clearly, Thomas," I replied, softening my tone. "Attempting to move me to a retirement community, planning to install Ashley's parents in my home without proper discussion, these aren't the actions of someone who values my role in your life or your child's." Ashley, perhaps sensing an opportunity to salvage the situation, leaned forward. "Evelyn, we genuinely thought the guest house arrangement made practical sense. We never intended to exclude you from the baby's life." Whether her contrition was sincere or merely tactical, I couldn't tell. But I recognized the opening for negotiation. "Then let's start fresh," I suggested, "with honest communication and mutual respect." Bradford Lawrence, displaying the business acumen that had built his fitness empire, took charge of the conversation. "Greg, it seems to me that fighting this in court would be costly, time-consuming, and ultimately damaging to everyone, including the company. I suggest you and Evelyn work with your respective attorneys to reach a fair settlement based on the actual legal standing of the assets." Greg glared but nodded reluctantly. "As for the living arrangements," Bradford continued, "Catherine and I will find alternative accommodations when we come to help with the baby. Perhaps Greg could move out of the main house, allowing Thomas and Ashley to remain there while Evelyn stays in the guest house. This would keep both parents close to the grandchild while maintaining appropriate separation." The logical, practical solution hung in the air. It wasn't what anyone had originally planned, but it addressed the core concerns of each party. "I can accept that arrangement," I agreed, "temporarily while we sort out the longer-term plans." All eyes turned to Greg, who clearly recognized he had few alternatives. "Fine, but this doesn't mean I accept your valuation of the company or your claim to the house." "That's for the attorneys to negotiate," Diana responded smoothly. "We're simply establishing an interim arrangement that works for everyone." As the meeting concluded, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, sadness, and a strange sense of liberation. The family I had devoted my life to had tried to discard me when I became inconvenient. Yet in preparing for that possibility, I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. Walking back to the guest house with Diana, I reflected on the dramatic shift that had occurred in just 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I had been the family doormat, expected to quietly accept whatever scraps of consideration they offered. Today, I had reclaimed my power and dignity. "You did exceptionally well in there," Diana commented. Many clients fall apart during these confrontations, but you remained focused and reasonable throughout. I've had 3 years to prepare emotionally, I reminded her, and a lifetime of practice in keeping my composure during difficult family moments. As Diana departed, promising to begin formal negotiations with Greg's attorney. Immediately, I stood in the doorway of the guest house, my house, and felt the weight of pretense finally lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, I was walking it on my own terms. 6 months passed, bringing profound changes to every aspect of my life. The divorce proceedings, while not amicable, progressed more smoothly than I had anticipated. Greg, recognizing the strength of my legal position and the potential public relations damage of a contentious court battle, eventually agreed to a settlement that acknowledged my contributions fairly. I received the house and property, half of our joint investment accounts, and a substantial cash payment representing my share of Turner Development's value. Greg retained control of the company but was required to pay the settlement in installments over 5 years. The agreement included a provision that I would sell the main house back to Greg at a fair market value if I decided to relocate permanently. As Bradford had suggested, Greg moved into a luxury downtown apartment, leaving Thomas and Ashley in the main house while I remained in the guest house. This arrangement, initially intended as temporary, proved surprisingly workable. With Greg's domineering presence removed, the dynamic between me, Thomas, and Ashley gradually began to shift. The first few weeks were awkward and strained. Thomas, still processing the revelations about his father's infidelity and financial maneuvering, oscillated between anger at being deceived and embarrassment at his own role in trying to displace me. Ashley, approaching her 3rd trimester, maintained a polite distance, clearly uncertain how to rebuild our relationship. The turning point came unexpectedly on a rainy afternoon when Ashley experienced false labor pains. Thomas was out of town at a conference, and panic drove her to knock on my door. "I think something's wrong," she admitted, fear overriding her usual composure. "The baby's not due for another 6 weeks." I drove her to the hospital, held her hand through the examination, and sat with her while the doctor explained Braxton Hicks contractions and ordered bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. "Thank you for being there," she said quietly as we drove home. "My mother would have just told me I was overreacting." "That's what family does," I replied simply. "We show up for each other." After that day, the ice began to thaw. Ashley, confined to bed rest and bored with daytime television, hesitantly accepted my offer to bring her books and keep her company. During those long afternoons, we gradually developed a genuine rapport, finding common ground in unexpected areas, from our shared love of historical fiction to our mutual discomfort with Catherine Lawrence's controlling parenting style. "I don't want to be like her with my child," Ashley confided one day. "Always criticizing, always expecting perfection." "Motherhood has a way of making you reconsider the patterns you grew up with," I told her. "You'll find your own path." Thomas, witnessing this evolving relationship, began to reconnect with me as well. He stopped by the guest house more frequently, sometimes bringing dinner or asking for advice about preparing for the baby. "I was wrong, Mom," he admitted during one such visit. "About how we treated you, about trying to push you out. I got caught up in what Ashley's family expected and what Dad was telling me was the right thing to do." "We all make mistakes, Thomas," I assured him. "What matters is recognizing them and doing better." As Ashley's due date approached, Bradford and Catherine arrived as planned, staying in a rented condo nearby. While Catherine maintained her somewhat distant attitude toward me, Bradford made genuine efforts to establish a cordial relationship. "I admire how you handled everything," he told me during a family dinner. "You protected yourself without seeking vengeance. That shows character." In October, my grandson Lucas was born, a healthy 8-pound boy with Thomas's chin and Ashley's blue eyes. Holding him for the first time, I experienced a joy so pure it washed away the lingering hurt of the past years. In that moment, nothing mattered except this new life and the love I already felt for him. The months following Lucas's birth brought further healing. Ashley, struggling with the adjustment to motherhood, increasingly relied on my experience and practical approach. Catherine's idealized advice about maintaining a perfect home while caring for a newborn proved less helpful than my simple strategies for managing sleep deprivation and baby fussiness. "How did you do this without all the modern conveniences we have now?" Ashley asked one exhausted morning as I walked a colicky Lucas so she could shower. "One day at a time," I replied honestly, and with a lot less pressure to be perfect than mothers face today. Greg remained a peripheral figure during this time. He visited Lucas regularly but kept his interactions with me minimal and businesslike. I occasionally caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps regret, perhaps simple confusion at the woman I had become in the aftermath of our separation. 3 months after Lucas's birth, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. After touring several properties with a realtor, I purchased a charming 3-bedroom home just 10 minutes from Thomas and Ashley. It was smaller than the main house, but far more spacious than the guest house, with a garden perfect for my newfound interest in horticulture and a dedicated room for Lucas to stay overnight as he grew older. "You're selling the house?" Thomas asked when I shared my plans. "But you fought so hard to keep it." "I fought for what was rightfully mine," I corrected gently. "That doesn't mean I need to keep it forever. This new place feels like home in a way the guest house never did. It's mine, chosen by me for me." With Diana's assistance, I negotiated the sale of the main property to Greg at a fair market value, using part of the proceeds to purchase my new home outright, and investing the remainder to supplement the income from my divorce settlement. At 58, I also returned to education, though not in the way I had originally planned. Rather than resuming classroom teaching, I accepted a position at a local community college teaching English to adults seeking their GEDs. The work was rewarding in ways I hadn't anticipated, connecting me with students whose life experiences were vastly different from my own, but whose determination resonated deeply with my personal journey. Margaret, who had been my emotional anchor throughout the divorce, became a regular visitor to my new home. Our friendship deepened as we shared not just our divorce experiences, but our rediscovered passions and newly independent lives. When Roger left me for his assistant, I thought my life was over. She reminded me as we enjoyed coffee on my garden patio. "Now I can't imagine going back to that marriage. I was surviving, not living." Her words resonated profoundly. For decades, I too had been surviving, accommodating Greg's ambitions, Thomas's needs, and eventually Ashley's expectations, all while suppressing my own desires and identity. 6 months after moving into my new home, I received an unexpected visit from Greg. He looked older somehow, the confident swagger diminished. "The house feels empty without you," he admitted after awkward pleasantries. "I keep expecting to hear you in the kitchen or see you reading in the library." "You could have had that for the rest of our lives," I pointed out. "It was your choice to end our marriage." He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "I made a mistake, Evelyn. Jessica and it didn't work out. She wanted the lifestyle without the history, the instant success, without the building process." He finally looked at me directly. "I've been thinking that maybe we could try again. Not immediately, but eventually. We have 35 years together, a grandson, a foundation we built." 5 years earlier, perhaps even 1 year earlier, I might have considered it. The familiar is powerful, and the Greg I had loved still existed somewhere within the man before me. But I recognized the request for what it was, not a genuine desire to rebuild our relationship, but a retreat to the comfortable pattern where I provided the stability and emotional support he now missed. "I've discovered something important, Greg," I told him gently. "I'm happier on my own than I ever was trying to make you happy. I wish you well, truly. But that chapter of my life is closed." His expression registered surprise, then a gradual understanding. He had expected that Evelyn, who had always accommodated him, always prioritized his needs above her own. That woman was gone, transformed, not by bitterness, but by the discovery of her own worth. As I approach my 59th birthday, I reflect on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The double betrayal that could have destroyed me instead forced me to draw upon strengths I hadn't known I possessed. The careful preparation that began as self-protection became the foundation for a new life more authentic and fulfilling than the one I left behind. My relationship with Thomas continues to heal, evolving into an adult connection based on mutual respect rather than the unbalanced dynamic of the past. Ashley and I have developed a genuine friendship, strengthened by our shared love for Lucas and her growing appreciation for the wisdom that comes from lived experience. Lucas, now crawling and babbling his first words, spends one day each week at Grandma's house, a tradition I cherish and one that would have been impossible had events unfolded according to the original plan to relocate me to a retirement community. The greatest gift of this difficult journey has been the discovery of myself, not as Greg's wife or Thomas's mother, but as Evelyn, a woman of substance and capability, with passions and purposes all her own. The painful ending of my marriage became the beginning of a life I never imagined possible. For anyone watching who finds themselves in circumstances similar to mine, undervalued, taken for granted, or facing betrayal from those you trusted most, I offer this hard-earned wisdom. It's never too late to reclaim your power. Preparation is not paranoia, it's self-respect. And sometimes the family you rebuild after loss, whether through rekindled relationships or new connections, can be stronger and more authentic than the one you thought you had. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who took you for granted? How did you find the strength to prioritize yourself after years of putting others first? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more conversations about midlife renewal and finding strength in unexpected places. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message of hope and empowerment, please share this video with them. Sometimes, knowing you're not alone makes all the difference in finding the courage to take that first step toward a better life. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your worth is not determined by those who failed to see it.